Welcome, everybody, to the Loud and Drunk podcast. This is Dan. Moses, do you remember Saturday morning cartoons?
God damn, I don't remember much, Dan, but, I should have said God Dan. The one thing I do remember is Saturday morning cartoons with the gummy bears, and I remember Muppet Babies. That was always fun. But there was one that kind of stuck out above all of them, which, you know what, I'll see what our guest has to say about it.
Oh, thank you. Sorry for butting in there. Eric Lancher, very happy to be here.
Huh.
I love 90s cartoons. I love more or less cartoons in general. It's really all of them are just the bee's knees for me.
So I have a quick story for you guys about Saturday morning cartoons. When I was a kid, every time my dad would have to work on a Saturday, he'd have to drive up north. I would ask him, it's like, before you leave for work, can you wake me up? And like a little bit of that was to be like, so I could say goodbye to him before he leaves for work.
Right.
But also it was so I could have the earliest possible start to watch all of the Saturday morning cartoons.
I love that. Yeah.
It was legitimately like I had at one point when I was like 9 years old, I had it all mapped out. I was like, all right, at this time frame, you switch over to like Fox. At this, you switch over to CBS.
Yes, and it ended with like Superstars of Wrestling or something.
Yeah,
there was like I remember Red Rooster, go.
And that was definitely a Saturday morning cartoon back then. The 90s.
Oh, the
wrestling.
90s. Yeah, Red Rooster was not in that.
But one of the best ones, like especially towards that 92 time frame, was X-Men. It tackled a whole lot of issues that most Saturday morning cartoons did not tackle.
I used to watch that for hours, it seemed like.
It was
like
more
always on in my childhood.
It was more like a soap opera than it was a Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah.
Like it just had so many deep topics that they talked about or loosely danced around.
I feel like that's kind of what you got to do too, because I think on the general note of cartoons, if you look back to like the originals, Looney Tunes, going way back, you need to make them for both the adult and the child audience, because it's adults that control the television, but you need the child to be entertained. That's kind of the point.
But it was also a serial that was kind of ingrained in those parents. Like that's when comics were becoming a thing of pop culture. So they knew the X-Men they knew at least of them. I mean, maybe in a lesser degree because it wasn't they were one of the most popular comics of the 60s, 70s. But, in the beginning of comics, there wasn't a thing.
Yeah, that was like a revival that happened at some point because I'm thinking back now like on the history.
The 90s was the revival.
Yeah. Because like my mother, she was born in 1947. So she like actually knows about these characters from when they were not like new, but marginally new. And she didn't really like watch that show with me because she was a grown woman with a job. But she was aware of like who a lot of these characters were anyway. And
your mother's a bit of a nerd. So
that's fair, yeah.
She would know,
So you are right. It did start off like in the 1960s or something like that. Didn't have like a whole lot of fanfare to it. They canceled it, and I think it was somewhere around the 80s. Maybe it was like the mid 70s.
Did they cancel it?
Yeah, they did. They got rid of it for a little bit, and I think it was Giant Size X-Men that brought
that
the
was
series
when
back.
That's when they had the new class.
Yeah.
It was like Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler, and somebody else. I can't
Wolverine was in it.
Wolverine, I think was that's right. Banshee, right? Yeah.
So speaking of a revival, they revived the old X-Men cartoon from 1992. 32 years later, inexplicably, and you got to think
it hurts every time you say that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it does, but you got to think.
Yeah.
You got to think that they bring this kind of IP back for nostalgia purposes.
It's totally a nostalgia grab.
But at the same time, we have watched this show now, and it is fair to say for me, like in terms of like marketing this show, I don't know who the core audience is supposed to be for this thing.
I think it's for those that grew up on it, but also for those that don't know it. Like they're trying to reach the two polar opposites of the spectrum, but nobody in the middle.
I think that, and just real quick, I want to say, Moses, you look absolutely fantastic for 60 years old or whatever.
Thank you. It's 160.
You look great.
I've been around for a long year. Yeah. I've stolen many man's soul.
Very nice.
And fate.
Yeah. Now, I think that, I don't know who it's targeted towards, but I mean, when you look at the original, it was made for the audience that was like, I don't know, let's say like,
the 18 to 30s.
No, the original was definitely targeted for
maybe
that Saturday
younger,
morning cartoon like demographic.
Kids.
But it was enough, for kids. But it was mature enough that Like my dad used to watch that show
Yeah.
with myself and my brother. And it was enough where like he could sit there and be like, oh, wow, this is actually kind of like mature for a kid's
like
show.
it's
Yeah.
like half watching it.
Yeah.
But it was like made for people who are, I'll just throw some numbers out there, like 12 to 18, let's say. But it was like good enough that, you know, somebody who was, you know, many years our senior at the time would be able to not hate it. You know, it wasn't something, it wasn't some
It was
bubble.
dealing with real issue, like
Yeah. And the animation was something that was palpable for, you know, somebody of that age
it
at the
wasn't
time.
cartoony. It was more
Yeah.
lifelike in a sense.
This is my issue with trying to describe this new one, which I've only seen bits and pieces of. This new one is, I don't know what people in that age demographic are watching today, because I too am old. I'm not as old as you, Moses.
It's
not by a
mostly
lot.
Japanimation.
Yeah. And it kind of, like, from what I saw, it does lend itself, though, over to a more Eastern style of animation.
Yeah.
Which is the way that everything's gone. I don't say that as a bad thing, because that's obviously, like, they do that really seriously over there.
I do see that in the new one compared to the old one. There is
Yeah.
a subtle,
It's not even
like,
Yeah, yeah.
like
It's
I don't
pretty
know.
overt.
It's.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a little bit more subtle because they all look like how they're supposed to look.
They do, but
It
also
just
at the
seems
same time,
cleaner.
it's too clean. It's
No.
sterile.
Well, that's kind of what I
Maybe,
mean, though, is
uh.
that the animation style from Japan is they put a tremendous amount of effort into it. You know, to use Japan as obviously
Yeah.
like they're the bellwether,
Yeah.
and they put a lot of effort into it. I mean, their animation is like what our blockbusters are. You know, there's a lot of money, there's a lot
That's
of time that
fair.
goes into it, and in the United States, we don't really emphasize that so much. So I think that's why you're seeing it drift.
Well,
in that
nobody's
direction.
going to a movie for animation unless Disney makes it.
Right, yeah, but in Japan, that's every movie, you know, and you know this. We were there together. It's that there they take that very seriously. So I think that
I was there with Eric Leshner.
Yeah, you don't remember that?
I kind
You
of
told me
do.
you were there twice with your buddy Justin and Pete, I think was his name.
No, it was Marquise.
Marquise.
Yeah, Justin and Marquise.
Oh, I have a terrible memory. I apologize.
Well, that's all right.
But yeah, that one time we met on that flight out of Atlantic City. It was
Yes.
Spirit. Yeah.
I don't remember that.
There was
but
a
all right.
rough landing in the South. We don't need to get into it
All
right
right.
now. Anyways, I enjoyed watching movies with you in Japan, and they were animated. They're of an incredibly high quality.
They were very high
And I
quality.
think that watching the bits and pieces that I've seen of this new X-Men, it's clearly borrowing from that. And I think that in general, American animation is kind of following that path. You know.
One thing I will add with this too is that when I watch this revival of X-Men, it really seems to me like, you guys remember Metalocalypse?
Yes.
It seems to follow that similar animation style.
It's not as choppy,
It's
though.
not as choppy, but it's also not as detailed as Metalocalypse
Right.
would be.
I
don't
Because
know.
if you look at the facial expressions that they have in that show, it gets very visceral. And there's no real visceral facial reaction from any of the characters in this 97 version.
I would disagree on some instances, like the Goblin Queen thing when Madeline Pryor says a goblin, like she's
Yeah.
a Goblin Queen. Like her whole transformation was fairly visceral.
I mean-
that and like Wolverine getting his fucking adamantium,
there-
like it was a still.
There are
And it was-
moments. There are moments when they do that, but I'm like consistently, it's not like if you go back and you watch the old 92 X-Men,
God, they weren't doing that kind of shit.
It-
Wolverine
they-
couldn't even
they-
cut a person.
they
There was no
could-
blood.
They couldn't do that, like, you know, that extra sort of detail, but the details in almost every scene. Like if you go back and you watch the old, I think it's called Cold Vengeance. I think it's the 6th episode. I went back and watched a little bit of the first season.
I've watched
It's-
them in the
the,
past.
the detail
rewatched
in
them.
some of the faces, just them standing
Mm.
there, is outstanding.
Right.
Like if you go and you look at Wolverine's face, you look at the Eskimos' faces. There's so much level of detail to those
Now I remember
those
that
people
episode.
that it's like, wow.
It
Yeah,
used
they
to
had
all
like the
be-
wrinkles in
Yeah.
like that you would have as a sun-torn
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
It used to all be hand drawn.
Exactly.
The further back you go, the more analog it was. And today, presumably, a lot of these things are being done by computers, which are also
More or
clean
less.
up the artwork
Yeah,
that
they're
you've done.
drawing on a computer
Yeah.
screen, and
You get much cleaner lines and things
Yeah.
like that. And at the same time, you are losing these little subtleties of the detail. You know, as to which one is better or not, I guess that's in the eye.
I don't hate this animation. Like, because there's some animated movies that come out that I'm like, I just can't watch this, even if I enjoy whatever the story is.
Right.
It's just like I can't watch. Like this animation is offensive to me. Like
Can you give me an example?
there was a DC film. I think it was Teen Titans.
Okay, I
Uh,
didn't see that. This is useless to me.
Well, you asked,
Teen Titans.
and I gave you an answer.
Yeah.
I wanna go back real quick and explore a little bit of who is this, show supposed to be for? Because the notes that I jotted down rewatching this, I don't think this can't be for kids because of its rampant horniness. There are so many scenes in this show that's about hooking up.
Okay.
I want. All right, you go ahead, because I actually have a retort to this, and I want to. Yeah.
Well, he's right, because there's the thruple of Wolverine, Cyclops, and whatever Jean Grey at the time.
Yeah.
And that's just a weird thing. Like, because this is also in the comics. Like, they're a thruple now on Krakoa.
Ugh.
And then there's the...
So that's a three-way, like, relationship?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That doesn't work.
Yeah, especially since one of them is psychic and it's the female.
And it's also two guys and a girl? How's that?
Yeah, like, I get...
Things I never want for 1,000.
Well, you know who's the power bottom.
Yeah, that's nice.
It's Cyclops.
Generating all the power.
There's the Forge and Storm relationship.
Yep.
There's also, it's not a thruple, but there's a three-way of Gambit, Rogue, and Magneto.
The love triangle.
The love triangle, yes.
Yeah.
There's also Jubilee and Sunspot. I think there's a relationship there. Then
it's pretty on the nose that they're trying to form a relationship.
There's Beast and
that reporter.
Chilby. I can't remember her name. That goes sour pretty quick.
Yeah.
What there's
and then there's Morph. And there's
Morph and Wolverine.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the weirdest one. Because they do make note, like when Rogue is going off, she's like, and like listing the bad things that the X-Men have done, and she's like, and Morph, like 3 seconds on our first mission, and they're dead, or like they're captured.
Yeah.
And she said them instead of him or her.
Yeah.
So, like, I get Morph can be whatever, but, like, there's one or the other.
Yeah, if we're going to jump into that real quick, whatever you want to do, if you're going to call this a revival of a show from 1992, then you shouldn't explicitly change a character that at no point showed any of the characteristics that you're going to make in this revival.
Well, we didn't see much of Morph in the first...
He did have more scenes towards the end.
Yeah, but he was a bad guy and then he was a good guy.
Yeah, he was a bad guy, he was a good guy, but at no point, like, they legitimately called him a he in that show. He was a guy. His natural form was that of a guy.
Yeah, well, like he...
And they purposely changed his voice to make it, and this should actually be more offensive to gay people, to make it more gay.
Oh, they like gave him like a lisp kind of thing?
Kinda. He has these quips.
Somebody didn't get a pony for the Sweet 16.
They really leaned into it.
He's making like Deadpool kind of jokes.
Yeah.
But he's not breaking a fourth wall, but he's just making them in the way Deadpool would. And it's just like weird.
Yeah, it's bizarre. And they changed how he appears. Now it's to my understanding
now he looks like the bad guy from Critters 3.
Yeah.
Or the bounty hunters from Critters 3. I don't know if they were good or bad.
Moses,
very obscure.
Moses, you're more of the comic book guy. Does he look like that in the comics? Or did he look like that in the comics?
I have very little knowledge or understanding of Morph.
Yeah.
Because I know of him. I don't know much about him or any story arc that he was pertinent to. But I don't think that his ability was just to change into whoever the fuck he wants and have all of their goddamn powers, because then why even have X-Men?
Yeah,
it's right. You can that guy can just go do it. He could be multiple man and fucking Wolverine, and it's like, well, like done. You're just invading with an army of Wolverines.
I remember distinctly from the old show, there was a scene where he was shape-shifting and he was trying to like psychologically destroy Wolverine, and he turns into Wolverine, and when he does his claws, Wolverine can just chop him off.
Yeah.
Like the whole point was that he can just turn into somebody else, but not so much
there
have
was
their powers.
That, but
it was like more of like a psychological thing.
Yeah, he would just look like the same way that what the hell is her name? Mystique,
yeah.
Like in that fashion, like she can
Stamos, right?
And then it was
part.
And then it was also Jennifer Lawrence.
That was the bad part. That was a bad part.
I was going to say Rebecca Romaine. She was great for that.
She was great for that.
But it's also hilarious to me that you changed Morph into a non-binary gay person.
That's fine. He could be a non-binary gay, but like whatever the fuck he is. I don't give a shit.
In every X-Men movie where Mystique is a character, it's a hot girl, and it's clearly a girl. Oh, and then the excuse for Morph now is that, well, he's a shapeshifter, so he can like get any genitalia he wants. I'm like, so could have Mystique. So why do we have this like kind of weird double standard?
I feel like the offense is that he could just have whoever's power he wants. Like, it's stupid.
We can dive into this a little bit more once we get into a little bit more of the narrative, and we can actually kind of do that from here. Because when the show kind of kicks off, you're introduced to like, a number of things.
We're picking up where we left off from the old original series.
So let's back up. If you have been on Mars in a cave with your eyes shut and your fingers in your ears, X-Men are a group of superheroes. Their powers come from when they were born, and they develop when they're adolescent. And
It's
it was
a mutation.
Yeah, it's a mutation. It was done that way because Stan Lee was tired of thinking up, or maybe it was Jack Kirby, was tired of thinking up of new origin stories for the superheroes.
Yeah.
Because
Sometimes you just want to make money.
yeah, you can't keep thinking of new animals to bite a person and then they get the power of like a spider, or maybe they get an atom bomb dropped on them and so all of a sudden they're like
I can't
green
wait
and-
till I'm bit by a super. Then I could be Superman.
It's right around the corner.
So the way the old show worked, and we won't go into the whole thing, but they're trying to essentially fight against the extremists on one side, humanity, that hates them because of who they are, and the other side of the extremists that are mutants and hate humans because of the way they are. And the show ends with Professor X, their leader, their teacher, the founder of like the school and X-Men and all that stuff. He gets whisked away to outer space by essentially his love interest,
Yeah,
Lilandra.
he was into that clue. That's what I love about this new season is that the term cloacussy came up
Okay.
because she's a bird person and Xavier's all about that pussy.
Wow. Yeah.
So the cloacussy.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's I don't know, that's fun.
That's fair.
That's fun for me.
Oh.
So essentially, we pick up this show. He's presumed dead. It's been a year because that show ended in 1996, I believe, or something like that
Something
nature.
to that effect.
And he's presumed dead. They're the Friends of Humanity, who are like the racist group that hates mutants. They're back. Don't know why, because essentially they were dissolved by the time the original ended. They have access to what are giant robots called Sentinels that are created to destroy mutants. And then from there, we're introduced to a number of characters that they were in the original series, but they've undergone a number of changes or are now inexplicably a part of the team. The first, when you first put it on, is Bishop, because Bishop is a time traveler. They only had a couple episodes with him in it. And then all of a sudden, now he's on the team. And why is he here? Why has he traveled back in time? And why can't he go back to his time? Don't know. Never
No, he
explained
came
it.
back with Cable.
He came back with Cable? When
Yeah.
did they explain that?
Well, you just saw them both come back.
You just know. In
You
your
just
heart.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, in your
They,
heart.
they never explained it.
Like
They-
that was, I
they
feel
have
like that
him-
was just
They have
like,
him travel
you know,
back in time. They have
when
him
he's a
travel
baby.
forward through time to take the baby there. But they never explained that, like, when Cable is traveling back in time to stop, the genocide that happens on Genosha, he says multiple times, I've traveled back to this time period
Like
multiple
200 times.
200 times, and I failed every single time to stop this genocide.
But
they
they
never
explained that.
explained that Bishop was also like, oh, yeah, I traveled with him. And I'm like, nah.
No, they said that they got separated in the time stream.
When did they do that?
It was in like one of the first episodes that Cable was back.
I never even heard that part.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That was they did
sounds
say
like-
that.
Did they say that?
It was kind of maybe a throwaway line, but like they
Sounds
did
like
say it.
Such a cop out, though.
It was kind of a cop-out.
You get separated in the time
It
stream.
was kind of a cop out, but
Yeah.
like they get Bishop in eventually. But
Yeah, I don't know if that does it for me.
that's X-Men, man.
This is why I stopped reading comics when I was young.
And then another thing that they don't do, apparently they did that, but they do in such a throwaway line that, I didn't even pick on it, and I
It's
watched
there.
it twice. Morph, as we already discussed, looks different, talks different, no explanation as to why any
Well,
of that
the
is
talking different. You got to forgive that just because they can't get the same voice actors.
happening. He's in it.
Oh, is
he's
that
in
the
show.
same guy?
Yes.
Well, he
The-
grew up. Like he's
he's-
grown.
he's-
That was 30-something years ago. You said
Yeah.
that's a lot of cigarettes, man. I don't sound
they-
the same as I did then.
They brought back Cal Dodd to do Wolverine's voice, and I can't remember her name, but they also brought back the woman who did Rogue's voice.
Oh, okay.
And then the interesting thing about that is, out of all I don't have any problem with the voice acting, like the new voice actors or anything, or even the way that Morph is voice acted. I just think it's kind of like stereotypical.
I think it's the writing and like what
Yeah.
he's supposed to be doing.
the female voice actress for Rogue. I had that Julia Kavner, the voice of Marge, feeling. I'm like, oh my god!
Oh,
Like,
it's like shrill.
it's
I
like,
could see that a
it's
bit.
just like
yeah.
you can't hit the pitch anymore. Why
It's
would they
like-
do this to you?
It is like a bad Marge impersonation.
Yeah, it was just like you can clearly, like, if you go back between the two, and then obviously there's 30 something years in between,
Yeah.
but like there was a high pitch to her voice.
Yeah.
And now it's like gravelly because she can't hit the same.
yeah, there was
high
a
voice.
shrill. Now it's gravel.
Yeah, and it's just like it's jarring, and it made me feel bad.
Well, that's what nostalgia
It
is
is
supposed to do, Dan.
Yeah.
Is make you
Not for
feel
nothing.
bad.
Yeah, I think you might be onto something with that. The nostalgia itself is
Because anything that we've watched or talked about in the past when we were talking like with nostalgia or revivals or whatever this is, or I guess this is a revival, but like Roadhouse wasn't great.
wasn't great. Yeah.
Like, not
I
that the
feel like
original
they're-
was great, but it's like, wow, you did worse.
I have a general disdain for like remakes and revivals and things like that.
But that's all it is.
Well, yeah, exactly. No, that's what I'm saying is that I don't like how easy it is for Hollywood to just kind of go in that direction. Obviously, they're doing it because it saves them money. They don't have to do the whole story. They just recreate it, and that's the cheap part.
They already have writers on retainer,
Exactly,
so like, just make this like, and not. That's what always happened, but there was like more original retellings of like Romeo and Juliet and like, those classic stories.
But what I think of with this, I mean, at least in part of it is that like, like I remember the original X-Men cartoon. I enjoyed watching it as a child. We've discussed it on occasion over the years in those rare like nostalgic moments. And then all of a sudden they do this revival remake and it's X-Men 97, and I have to do that math like in my own mind, and I'm like, my God.
Well, it makes sense as far as the story goes, as far as the time goes, but it's also X-Men where time doesn't fucking matter.
Well, that's just it. There's that time travel element.
They have that. They have that available to them.
So let me ask you this, Moses. Since like I guess I didn't pick up on why Bishop is there. Did they ever really explain, like, because it seemed to me that at the end of the original that the Friends of Humanity was kind of like disbanded, because it was not really a thing for the rest of that series. And like there was one episode where they kind of like gave up because their leader was Graydon Creed, who was Sabretooth's kid.
Yeah.
When they found out that he was the son of a mutant, they were like, why would we follow
Yeah,
this
because
guy?
he was a senator or something like that.
But like, did they ever bother explaining?
They kind of do. Like the Friends of Humanity get reform in a sense because of Bastion.
They get reformed because of that.
Yes, like he gives them the tech and shit where he gave the tech to Executioner and had all these regular humans just kind of as fodder. But he eventually gives them that kind of equipment. Like they have that technology available, and it was all part of his scheme to.
Well, yeah, it was a part of the scheme.
I don't get like I don't really know how it all connects, but that was part of his scheme. So he's the one that like kind of got them back into it. Like they were disbanded for as best of because the Nazis have been disbanded for how long? But we still got some fucking Nazis, Yeah,
but they're still flying under the Friends of Humanity thing, and that's what really threw me off because it's just like, why are they here?
Yeah, well, the Nazis do that too. They're still saying Nazi, even though like,
the Friends of Humanity, the Nazis.
Well, in this instance, they're comparable because that's kind of what the Friends of Humanity in this instance are.
Well, a gripe that I had then, like, leaving that aside, kind of with the story, is it doesn't seem to be like, there seems to be moments where there's absolutely no stakes to the story. An example that I have here is that Professor X's whole like dilemma about whether he'll forget the X-Men. Will he go to Earth? Will he not go to Earth? It ends up all kind of being a waste of time. Like it's not even kind of like developing his character. It's just like a long kind of way of just like, let's eat up half of an episode, most of an episode.
That's part of the money right there.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. They were Dragon Balling it kind of, but also it's 30 minutes and there's so much story here and they kind of gloss over all of these like mainstay stories, like the fucking Madeline Pryor clone thing. That's a big bit of comic to read. And the hell's his name? Wolverine getting his adamantium ripped off. That's a bit of comic to read. And they kind of, and even the fucking Magneto and the Genosha thing, it's a bit of like there's a lot of story there and they kind of crib note it.
Well, that's a thing that I really didn't like because one of my favorite comic book story arcs was the Fatal Attraction story arc.
The Goblin Queen. The
Goblin Queen, but also the one that really kind of pulled me is that's when Colossus turned heel and he went to go join the Acolytes.
Well, he's not even in it.
Yeah, he's not even in it. So they had, instead of Colossus turn heel, they had Rogue turn heel. So she's the one that does the whole betrayal, like, I'm going to join Magneto. There's absolutely no stakes to that because, like, a few minutes later, she's back on the team.
Yeah. Like once Magneto is over.
That bugs me because you spend so much time, especially early on in the season, just being, like, doing this whole
aligning her to Magneto in a way.
That's fine. You're doing that. That's building up the story, which is fine. But then there's no payoff to it because, in a sense, you are spending so much time on exposition and not giving me enough payoff to go along with that. Like if you would try to condense that.
It does make sense for her character and how they portrayed her to go with Magneto, especially after Gambit died.
I'm not arguing against that. My argument is that you needed to make that, it didn't get the payoff that it needed to get. Because when Colossus joins Magneto, he's there for a while.
Yeah, but Magneto wasn't there for a while either.
What do you mean?
Like when they go to fight him and Rogue is on her side, on his side, and she takes out Wolverine. And Magneto's shut down kind of quick in a way, because like Xavier just kind of like mind melds him, and
Yeah.
they're both out. But the only fucking real threat there is Magneto, because Rogue ain't gonna do shit against her fucking friends.
But that's kind of what really bugs me about it, though, is because it's taking away the stakes of something that you've been building up for the entire season. And now I was like, oh, no, I'm back on the team. And nobody seems to care. I'll use the other example, which is one of the biggest moments in the entire season, is when Magneto rips out Wolverine's adamantium. Now, in the comic, if I remember this correctly, you can correct me.
I might not be able to, but that was a big moment.
It was a big moment, and Professor X destroys his mind. He puts him into essentially a catatonic state.
He kind of who Wolverine,
No, Professor X does that to Magneto.
but that's kind of what he did.
But no, then he brings him back. So they can have
but-
this nice little buddy
Magneto's
moment.
still around now, you know.
Yeah, no, but like it again, in terms of the story arc, what they had in the comic, now I might be off base here. That happened for a little bit. Like he was kind of like,
Well,
because I remember picking up an issue of the X-Men back in the day where it was like Colossus was kind of like
Double agent kind of.
Well, no. He was kind of like second guessing, I guess, why he was, why he was there or whatever. And Magneto's still catatonic, but he's catatonic in this show for like, half an episode.
That's the thing about this show that kind of annoys me, is like you're glossing over. It's a Wikipedia of
Yeah.
X-Men 90s, like the comics.
You're distilling it.
Yeah, you're just getting like your bullet points,
Yeah.
and that's kind of it. You're not really explaining any of it.
I mean, the bottom line is that you're never going to make a show like this that revolves around a pop culture phenomena from years ago or even from the contemporary period unless you can rope many more people into it. And like the bottom line is that if you get too specific, if you hone in on it, you're going to discourage those potential viewers. This is just Hollywood being Hollywood.
That's fair, but I think they could have, like, even if they were out like 45-minute, 50-minute animation, like, and I don't know how many episodes there were. What is it?
There
like
were 10, but also like this was all straight to Disney Plus. And
Well,
they-
that's fair.
and-
And they could have done 10, 45 to 50-minute episode. Like, just like
Bandwidth.
they had
They
shit
didn't have
there.
they had unlimited bandwidth. I don't think they was like you're limited to
Well, they
30
didn't have
minutes.
They didn't have unlimited fucking people.
I mean,
and
that's
there was
fair.
a lot of
And you,
problems
like,
with that
Yeah, you
production.
wanted. Yeah.
I have a question.
What's up?
So Wolverine's adamantium skeleton, why isn't it his teeth too?
That's a fair question.
Yeah. And also, like follow up to this, they have like
I
those
might have an answer
three
to that one.
little bones in your ear that help you to like create balance and such like that.
Yeah.
If those were covered in adamantium, which they are actually proper bones as opposed to the enamel in your mouth, then
All
they
right.
wouldn't really work the same way.
No,
so are
this-
they not covered?
No.
Or is he deaf?
They're not part of the contiguous skeleton.
What constitutes a contiguous skeleton?
Your main skeleton.
Yeah, the main one.
Yeah.
Not the other ones.
Those are just floating in your ear. They're not part. You don't skin.
Well, none of your bones are actually like touching
Well,
themselves.
yeah,
There's
but
cartilage in between them.
but there's more cartilage.
It's a comic book. Don't look too much into this.
Dan, I don't know if I like that answer.
They're far
thought
enough
that this was
apart
a
from
scientific
the main
podcast.
skeleton that they didn't get bonded to the adamantium.
Okay.
Anytime you notice something like that, a wizard did it.
Oh, wizard did it.
Tachyons, man.
Tachyons. It's always tachyons, isn't it?
All right, so
I like that they had Silver Surfer just show up in it.
well, they had plenty of cameos.
And Cloak and Dagger.
I know
Like,
that.
fuck yeah, they're mutants.
I know I'm coming off negative with this. And it's not bad. It's just there's moments where I'm like, okay, you're kind of like pretty inconsistent with this, but there are moments where like, wow, this really hits. Like the adamantium scene is really good.
The Wolverine and Nightcrawler scene when they're fighting, like Nightcrawler's got 3 swords. It's
Yeah.
like so fucking awesome.
Yeah, that's kind of like why I get a little critical, because if I'm comic book guy to any comic book series, it's X-Men. Just
Really?
because
That's the worst one to be.
because it's
There's so much nonsense in that.
because it's so nonsensical, but it's also because of the cartoon in which this one is trying to revive.
Yeah.
It's the X-Men one, and every time I've watched like an X-Men movie, like the first one with Hugh Jackman and
That
all
was
that
all
stuff,
right.
I watch it. I'm like, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
Wolverine
That's
doesn't
how I
know who Sabretooth is. This is bullshit. Like I was like that as a child.
That was all right.
As a quick example, what was it? Age of Apocalypse or
That was
X-Men
not
Apocalypse?
okay. That was not an okay movie.
I saw that with a bunch of Navy friends, and I was noticeably not liking the movie. And so when we walked out of the theater, my friends were asking me, how'd you like the movie? And I'm like, yeah, this is all the reasons why that movie is bullshit.
Yeah.
And then by the time we got back to like the rental house where we were staying, they all hated the movie because I had just gone so full-fledged negative.
They should have hated the movie. That was a bad movie.
It was a bad movie. Most of those X-Men movies are terrible. And I will...
The Quicksilver scene was great.
Yeah, and now it's overdone because they do it in every movie that has anyone that's
Quicksilver's the
relatively
best
fast.
character now. He's the new Wolverine.
I will say this, despite all of the negativity, all of the criticism that I've already mentioned, and and that I will do later on, this was better. This is better than most, if not all, of those X-Men movies.
Yeah. All right. It's better than a lot of them.
I mean, you could make an argument that maybe X2 is better, but I didn't like X2 too because it's just like, oh, we're going to jump immediately into the Phoenix saga.
My favorite,
and they didn't even do that right.
favorite comic book movie of all time remains, and probably shall always be, I think it was 1972 Captain America.
Oh, right.
And that's actually one of the nice little cameos that I liked about this show. They had Captain America in there.
Rogue just yeeted his fucking shield.
That's why,
She was like, oh, I guess you won't be needing this.
Yeah.
Later.
Yeah.
And he walked away to get it.
And they are kind of setting up the X-Men versus Avengers
They
thing,
are.
which is nice. Like if you can do that and you can do that right and you don't make, Captain America a freaking bitch like you kind of tried to do in that scene with Rogue.
Well, he didn't do anything. He just took it.
Well,
and he's just like, all right, fine. Like, I get you're angry. He was being Captain America.
Yeah, he's
like,
being Captain America.
He didn't want to fight her. I don't know how that would go, but
Probably wouldn't go well for him, but also at the same
can't
time, they
imagine.
really kind of exaggerated her freaking powers too.
well, yeah.
because
well,
when she-
they exaggerated Morph.
Yeah,
so
they
why
exaggerated
not?
Morph. They exaggerated her. He's like, when it was, what
like-
is his name? General Thunderbolt?
Thaddeus
I
Ross.
forgot about that.
Yeah.
He's just like, and that's actually a pretty good line too. It's like, do I have to remind you, gentlemen, that we're in a facility that's meant to like capture or like,
The Hulk,
withstand the
yeah.
Hulk? And like the Hulk is supposed to be like the unlimited, powerful
Unstoppable,
like
yeah.
character. And it's like, nah, she broke right in. So,
So Juggernaut, bitch.
I think that also alludes to Thunderbolt Ross's underestimation of the Hulk.
you can also argue that too. All right. So I wanted to get into something with you guys as well, because I kind of picked up on this and most people won't like that I picked up on some of these things.
Well, why wouldn't you?
In my estimation, there is a clear ideological slant to X-Men 97.
It's a quality, isn't it?
No, it's not, because that's what X-Men, the original, was. Because as I said before, X-Men was sort of like you have the extremists over here, Friends of Humanity. They hate mutants because they're mutants. And then you have Magneto and, the other bad mutants, and they hate humans because they're humans. And then you have in the middle the X-Men, who are like, no, we should all live together in like peace and like learn to tolerate each other.
But Dan, they had their lead was Sunspot, Roberto Acosta,
Yes.
and then Jubilee was his friend who's Asian.
Was Jubilee Asian?
Yeah, her real name is Jubilation Lee. That is her.
That's also that's a terrible name.
Oh, well,
That's a terrible name.
that's why she's called Jubilee. Because what are you
And
going to
she's
call her?
Asian because her
Sparkler?
last name is Lee?
Well, she's also just Asian. Like that's what it is in the comics.
All right. I'm
like,
not trying to judge the book by its cover.
well, how many Irish do you know with the last name Lee? It's usually Mick Lee
Two?
or O'Lee. O'Lee
I
Lee.
do know Ole, yes.
O'Lee Lee.
And Mac Lee.
They're a bunch of drunks. Mac Lee.
They are.
Oh,
heavy
fuck the
drinkers.
Mackleys.
But what I'm going to say about the clear ideological slant is that the entire kind of thesis of the season is that Magneto is right. They say it multiple times. They have like a sign when they're landing in Genosha with somebody holding up a sign. That says
A
Magneto
couple of
is
them
right.
say it. Like I know Jubilee says it in the Mojo episode,
Yeah.
and then they say it again later on in like in the last 3 episodes.
Yeah. So they're trying to really push this idea. Now I have a thesis and you guys can, insult me all you want for it. There's a clear idea floating around that the X-Men are an allegory, an analogy, whatever you want to say, for the civil rights movement. Now, with the idea of Professor X being like MLK and Magneto being like Malcolm X. Now, if you're going to do that and you're trying to like do this whole because the civil rights movement was about equality and all that stuff, if you're going to do that and do the entire show where it's like, Professor X is kind of like an asshole and Magneto is right, you're kind of going down this rabbit hole of...
Yeah, but they don't say that Magneto isn't an asshole.
They've said multiple times
that he's
they don't even do that. He's an asshole. That he's trying to like kind of like I'm trying to be better.
Well, he's trying to live up to Xavier's like he gets bequeathed.
Yeah, he gets
X-Men and whatever that entails.
In some ways, though, I could see that analogy, that allegory, whatever we want to call it. I could see that being like somewhat fair, because if you look at like an MLK, right, and you compare him to Professor X, then you're talking about
peace instead of
it's that we need to achieve these goals and they're very important, but we need to do it with nonviolence. We're not going to force our perspective onto other people. Whereas Magneto very much so has dealt with the consequences of this in a real way. He's not like some fucking house nigga, and he's going to, let's call it like it is. And he's going to do what's necessary. I mean, literally the quote from Malcolm X is, by the way, his birthday was just May 19th. So happy birthday. But the gist of it is that the main quote that's lended to him is by any means necessary. And I think that does to a degree sum up what Malcolm X's perspective was by any, or rather Magneto and Malcolm X share this, that it's by any means necessary. We want to in some way validate our own people, and it's going to take what it's going to take.
It is great that I think it was Beast who quotes Malcolm X.
No, he quotes
Martin
MLK.
Luther King.
Yeah.
That
riots are the voice
of the unheard.
Yeah. So there's clearly a slant in that direction, but I also want to point out a slant that they didn't do in this run that they did do in the initial run of the series, which is, did you notice any mutants being discriminatory against humans? Did you ever notice that any mutants were like talking about mutant supremacy? Did you notice that anyone was like, oh, those humans?
Well, Bastion
was doing that, but also at the same time, he was like,
I get that's his impetus.
That's his impetus. But they kind of just the one guy. And also at the same time, he was doing this whole thing. I'm like, oh, I'm going to bring them into the future. So he's trying to.
It seemed odd, his whole MO. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Like, you are against mutants, but you are a mutant, but you want
that's called
humans.
Carlton.
Yeah, but and then he wants humans to not survive, but he wants them to become kind of, mutated at least.
For that kind of story arc with Bastion and Mr. Sinister, it's kind of like really more of an experimentation. Like,
you need more time
for the
story.
Yeah. Well, they had to waste it on a little story arc with Jubilee being in a video game.
Yeah, that's true too. That was kind of unnecessary.
But when I'm talking about this, like you had in the original run, you had Magneto talking about mutant liberation, mutant supremacy. You had Sabretooth calling humans literally insects. You had a number of mutants that were like, I don't like humans because they're humans. Yeah. They hate us. I hate them.
Yeah, it's kind of. I guess
well, they had Genosha at that point.
It's the and obviously in this particular framework, the phrase might not apply, but the essence of it is true. It's the dehumanization of your enemy, of your opponent, And that was always prevalent in those old comics.
Yes. And so that's one of the things that I think it's missing. It's missing that hitting both sides, that there are extremists on both sides.
Oh, yeah.
The other show did kind of capture it. And this one, it was just kind of like, there was kind of like a little bit of a noted to technology. Like they said that little part of like chat rooms and all that stuff. So it wasn't really so much that like, oh, Bastion is a human that hates, is a mutant that hates humans. It was so much that he was radicalizing already radicalized humans. And there was a number. So in this instance, I'm kind of seeing like, you have Friends of Humanity over here, and you still have the Friends of Humanity over there. It's like, they are still sort of like the punching bag in this entire run.
I never got anything like this out of chat rooms back in the late 90s.
Yeah.
I had a lot of really
I barely got an ASL.
A little bit of time in court,
Yeah, so that's another reason that it's just like some of these trying to reference the 90s, but it's clearly 30 years ago, and you've clearly forgotten what the 90s is like.
Well, it has the Twin Towers in the background.
Though, that goes back, though, to your question of who is this for?
Yeah.
Because not for nothing, if it was for people who are younger than us by a few years, let's say, well, we were one of the last generations that really knew what a chat room was.
Yeah.
So, in other words, it's very much so going to be lost on that.
Well, they did kind of corner themselves by calling it 97.
Right, yeah.
So they have to allude to that technology of the everyday person.
That implies, though, that it is indeed meant for this new version is meant specifically as that nostalgic kind of callback.
Well, it's definitely for nostalgia. Yeah. Oh, it's definitely for nostalgia.
Well, I was speculating,
but it gets the nostalgia
is it at all for people who are younger.
It gets
like the way the original one was.
The younger generation. It gets their nostalgia as well for our nostalgia. because that's all that's really in society anyway now is 80s and 90s, mostly 80s. You know,
I agree that it's nostalgia based, but like based on what I've seen, because we didn't really go over this too much, we kind of went over to the story. There's the mild language and blood, which isn't a huge deal. The blood would kind of
blood
get you
on
hit.
the blood, like when Wolverine stabs Magneto. Oh, spoiler alerts.
They already know. They should already know.
Yeah, they should. But like he puts his claws through Magneto and blood drips down the blades and he wounds Magneto.
And I mentioned it too, like the genocide in Genosha, when it's like that random like super sentinel that goes there and just destroys the whole thing. It's very graphic.
All of the Sentinels that they're like cutting apart, like when Kurt and Wolverine are protecting Rogue, those are all actual people, but they have that virus or whatever, that techno thing on them.
Yeah.
And it's like they're just slicing up people with no regard. Like, fine, yeah, I believe Wolverine would do it. But Kurt, Mr. fucking holier than thou priest?
Yeah, they really kind of dial back his religious beliefs in this one.
They throw rosary beads in his hand every goddamn moment.
No, they really did that in the last couple episodes.
That guy doesn't even have like, where is he keeping
If you go back and you watch that old episode where they first introduce him, it is like every other word out of his mouth is a Bible quote.
Yeah.
And now in this one, it's just like he was like, it seemed to me when I watched that and I saw it for the first time, it's it's kind of like, and now this is really a throwback. Do you remember that only one time shown X-Men cartoon called X-Men? No, it's actually called Pride of the X-Men.
Yes, the where we had Australian Wolverine.
Yeah, Australian Wolverine. And it seemed like it was a mix of those two Nightcrawlers, where you had like a little bit more of a fun-loving Nightcrawler, and then a little bit of his religious beliefs in there.
He gives a eulogy at Gambit's funeral.
He does the eulogy there.
I can't believe they killed Gambit. Like, I don't like Gambit, but
they did cuck him and just kill him off.
Yeah, that was just like, huh.
But
all right,
they're gonna bring him back.
I'm sure they will. Why wouldn't they? He's a popular character.
But
I don't have enough of those guys from New Orleans.
But what I wanted to go through when we're still while we're still talking about who is this for, I kind of like ran through like, well, with all of the things that I said, the rampant horniness, the mild language and blood, that's clearly not for young children. So it wouldn't be for like. We're all in our 40s except for you. You're like 90 years old.
He's 56 tomorrow.
I'm going to be 21 tomorrow.
Still a spring chicken. So with our age comes the idea that you'd have like a young child, maybe 10 years old or something like that. So the idea would be if you were 40 years old and you have a 10-year-old son, that this is something you could sit down and watch with that kid. And you both be able to enjoy it. No, I don't really think
there's
you could.
There's a lot of flashing lights. The kid's not going to get the story. That's fine. But he's just like, oh, I know who to root for.
Do you think that watching that scene of Genosha being destroyed and them showing like dead bodies all over the place. There's blood everywhere. There's a scene where they have like what was her name? Callisto from
Morlocks. From the Morlocks.
I will say
her eyes are wide open and she's dead.
Let me answer this.
All right, you got that?
Yes.
I think that just as a minor rebuttal to that, again, I'll bring it back to the old school cartoons. When you look at the old fucking Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies and such like that, there was death, there was sexuality, there was
never death.
There was absolutely
there was kind of death. But it wasn't real.
There was always sort of implied death. Like I'll go back to the original source material for the show. In the first episode of X-Men, Morph dies. Or actually, it's the second episode.
No, he gets captured.
No, he dies.
He gets captured.
He's dead, and then
they allude
Mr.
to
Sinister
his death.
grabs him, and does whatever he does with him.
Oh.
You know what Sinister does. Sinister things.
We capture that, but they never actually show it. So there's that kind of still like it's implied that he's dead. With this one, they're actively showing it. They show Gambit die. They show multiple people get incinerated.
Leech. Poor little Leech.
So there's multiple. They show a child dying in that. So it's not really meant for, a young child. Like if you went back to 1992 and you plopped, 7-year-old producer Dan watching the show, I'm sure my dad would have some thoughts. I'd be like, oh, this is
I'll tell you, Margaret
really
Thatcher
violent.
would never let that happen.
So
I knew ye.
So I came up with the idea that the show thematically seems like it's supposed to be for like young adults, teenagers. But then it's like the least likely demographic to actually watch it because why would they?
And now that you said, I think it's growing up with us.
It's growing up with us?
Yeah, like it grew up to where we are now, who originally who were invested in the original cartoon.
It's for
it's
people
for us.
It's for, I understand that, but also at the same time.
And so it grew up that way.
We grew up that way. However, there's multiple times I'm watching the show and I'm like, this isn't really for me. Because this is a whole lot of the show just seems like it tries to do this balance of like, oh, this part is little kitty. This part isn't, though. It's super graphic and violent.
It's trying to make everybody happy.
Yeah, it's trying to do that. But at some point, you kind of have to
pick one side.
You have to pick something.
Yeah.
And so that's why I thought the perfect idea for their show would be, we watched the show when we were kids. 40 years old.
We're the ones with the Disney Plus accounts. It ain't my children.
Yeah.
Well, it is my children because they're old too.
We should hypothetically have young kids that we could watch this with, and we have nostalgia for it, and we can bring them up and say like, oh, this is a show I used to watch when I was a kid. Let's see what it's like now. And for most parents, I don't think this is a show that you would want to watch, especially if your kids are young. If your kid is like 13, fine.
Yeah, that's different.
That's different. But if like your kid's like 7, 8, 9 years old, that might be a little too young.
I don't know. These
for
are
their
the
show.
same kids that are playing GTA and Call of Duty, so I don't think it really matters.
Well, times have changed. Yeah.
Yeah, the times have changed quite a bit, and I don't like. I think this is pretty fucking tame considering what they really should be doing if they were granted.
Your kids are watching like SVU all the time, or wherever that show is.
That's all I
it's
watch.
Entirely about rape.
They do watch.
It makes
SVU.
me uncomfortable. I'm 30.
We also watch Cooking Masters.
That's better, I guess.
Man, none of them can cook. I compare them to Chef Master Jr. I'm like, this 9-year-old, she's making fucking floating noodles. Like, I'll describe that later.
Here's the difference with all that, though. You don't watch those shows with your kids.
No, I watch them by myself.
If this is supposed to be a show that you watch with your kids, which is obviously what should be the market.
My kids are older than that, but
would you want to watch this type of show? It's not that it's like your kid would be okay to watch it, but is it the child okay to watch it by himself? Would he want to watch it with you? Would you want to watch the show with your kid? There's that little dichotomy. It's like ever watch anything that's a little bit more risque, and then all of a sudden one of your parents
not one of those things.
When I'm watching television with my kids, it's Brazzers.com or nothing.
I've learned since I watch so much SVU, that's not okay, man. Like, stop that.
This seems to me.
I know you don't actually have kids.
I don't know what we're talking about right now.
This seems to me.
Put those kids back where they came from, or so help me.
Moses, you have watched a number of those like DC animated movies and all that stuff,
Yeah.
and they're more mature. They're clearly
they're definitely more mature. Yeah.
So it seems to me it's kind of like trying to get that age bracket, like the young adult.
It is because
teenager
DC's
bracket.
kind of been dropping the ball a little bit. Like, it's still great animation and great stories, but they kind of throw in nonsense that doesn't need to be there, like the Killing Joke. Like, there was no point in that story where Batman and Batgirl were, like, banging. But now we throw that in, and then Commissioner Gordon gets shit. Like, it makes, I get it ups the ante of the whole thing of it, but why was that in that?
I also want to bring up something as well to switch back to the ideological slant. Another time-wasting moment. I already mentioned before that the Professor X dilemma thing was kind of a waste of time. That was
kind of a waste of time.
And it just seemed like it was there just so they could make a point about colonialism. And the point was that essentially the Shi'ar Empire, effectively, where Professor X is hanging out at that point because he was revived by them. They don't explain what they did to, make him better or whatever. Alien stuff. Yeah, Wizard did it.
It's only sorcerers.
The speech that he gave was that you cut off the knees of whatever, the worlds around you. Right, yeah. And they would, if you had done nothing, they would have all grown equally and be as powerful, if not, and have surpassed you. And I'm like,
that's not necessarily true.
That's how nothing works that way. Plants don't work that way. Have you ever seen a flower? Have you ever seen a field of flowers? There's always a couple flowers that are a little taller than the other ones.
Dan, all of the fields that I've ever looked at, the flowers are of exactly equal height. Because, from each according to their ability and to each according to their need. And flowers, of course, abide by Das Kapital. And I will die on that hill.
Huh.
That hill covered in flowers where all are equal.
It's theoretically possible if you don't attack one civilization that it can grow to be a competitor of yours.
Like Wakanda.
Potentially.
Also, they had T'Chaka, not T'Challa.
What? T'Chaka?
Well, this is a Black Panther reference for those of you who don't know what he's talking about.
I thought it was funny that
my head.
Yeah.
I thought it was funny that they were talking to King T'Chaka instead of T'Challa.
I didn't even pick up on that because I'm not a big Black Panther.
I feel like I'm the only black militant in this room at best, and yet these words are lost on me.
Well, they all because
your Filipino is showing.
Well, I zipped it.
But I found that to be so frustrating because since the Professor X kind of angle really didn't have any stakes, because it all just led up to him eventually just making up the decision that you knew he was going to make anyway.
Yeah.
Of going back.
Well, it was the right decision.
Yeah, the right decision. So it should have just kind of went to like, listen, this is what he's going to do. Unless you're planning on building that later, then just get to the damn point so we can build up these other stories.
Let's also take into account that Professor Xavier is not a good person. In the original comics, he was trying to bang Jean Grey.
In any good medium, there are no good and bad characters. There are only morally ambiguous characters. Breaking Bad taught us that.
I think Moon Knight is a good character. And he is completely right in everything he does.
I will. To piggyback on that, I do find it to be something which is a big turnoff, not just with comic books and comic book shows, movies, etc., but in general, when it comes to entertainment out of Hollywood, the way that there's like this drift towards making, and maybe it's always been that way, but very monolithic characters that are either good or bad.
Like a John McClane. Like that guy he's like nothing.
Well, that's from Die Hard. He's not a good guy.
He's not a good guy, and that's a great example of like the way that they used to make things well. Because like if you look at
he's an anti-hero,
a John Wayne or a John McClane, you're looking at somebody who's deeply flawed. They're honestly not somebody that you really want to like. You don't want to have them sleeping on your sofa. I'll put it that way, But at the same time, they're very capable of doing righteous things.
Yeah. The John McClane from Die Hard 3 and on is the one that's inherently flawed because he's an alcoholic and his kids.
That's fair.
He was flawed from the get-go.
Nah, he was flawed, but right.
He was supposed to be like, because they established that in the first movie. He's arguing. It's just like, he even says it to himself. He starts like a fight with his wife. It's like, real mature, John.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he was a deeply flawed person, and yet he was capable of righteous acts, And when you look at these modern retellings, sometimes, in Hollywood cooks something up that's original and an initial telling.
I haven't seen one.
They haven't done that in a while. But that's what it lacks for myself. It's that you get these really monolithic characters. And I'll bring it back to the show with this. It's that's something where, to a degree, and I only watched a little bit of this remake, this revival, but I find that so fascinating about the character Magneto because he is indeed, he's a flawed person.
Yeah.
He's got good reasons, good logic, so on and so forth, as to why he's doing what he's doing. But he's also very aware. He has
sound logic, not good logic.
Well, what he's doing is he's killing. He's doing something that we, for the most part,
he doesn't really kill anybody.
You know what I'm saying, though. Yeah.
Which is for all his threats and everything they know he's capable of, but he doesn't do it.
Xavier, though, is supposed to be this entity where he's never doing anything wrong. His behavior is just as destructive as Magneto.
Yes, in a different way, but yes.
Yeah. He's not even in it for most of the half of this, and then all of a sudden they I guess they leaked of the footage or whatever, and everyone thought he was an asshole. Like nobody even got over like, oh wait, Professor X is back. I'm so happy to see you. It went to like, you're an asshole. Yeah. Like, oh great, this is
the other thing I like that they did was not lean on Wolverine, which is kind of the easy way to go because Wolverine is so popular. Yeah. But he's also barely in it.
He's barely in it. It's funny too because he's barely in it, but you had the most freedom for him to hack and slash because in the original run,
maybe it was the trade-off.
It was a show for kids, so the only thing that he could really
with the robots,
defeat with robots.
It was like the Ninja Turtles cartoon.
Moses, question for you. So, I'm sorry, not Magneto. Wolverine. His bones are covered in adamantium.
They're covered in it, yeah.
Right, and that's like basically impermeable, something like that.
Yeah.
So when he gets a boner, is that covered in adamantium?
No, because that's not an actual bone.
What does it do?
It's not an actual bone.
That's not what the name implies.
No, it's a hard-on.
It's called a boner, though.
Yeah, but
we'll circle back to it.
It's just because it's hard. It's all cartilage and blood flow.
Asking for a friend.
Cartilage and blood flow, my friend.
Really?
Yeah. There's no bone in that. But you can break your dick.
There has to be.
You can break your dick. Oh, you can break your dick.
Wow.
And that hurts more than 7 bitches on a bitch boat.
So this is why his is covered in adamantium.
That's why he uses those condoms. Because you don't want, do you know about his kids?
I'm hooked on adamantium condoms.
Now you.
Well, I could go into
You've dug your own grave on this one.
Yeah. Well, he gets adamantium condoms because, just like Superman has kryptonite condoms.
Yeah.
But I don't know how that works because the kryptonite would lessen the boner.
Yeah.
But with Wolverine, he doesn't have that problem, and he has adamantium condoms because his
to keep the dick hard.
To keep the semen in. To keep his irregular the razor blade semens too.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
What? No, this doesn't. This is not what.
Let's
I read in
move
the
on.
comics.
Razor blade Siemens, man. I'm telling you. He
Dan,
shoots.
Dan, you will not edit this out.
No, I won't.
Wow, this is most of the episode.
Adamantium condoms. All right, continue, Dan. But I do want to circle
Band
back
name.
to this.
Band name.
Oh, it is. All right, I'll write that. I can't do it right now. We're
You
doing
can
the
do it
podcast.
now. You're gonna forget.
I know. Yeah, the adamantium condoms. All right.
Hello,
Dan,
Cleveland.
go ahead.
So another point I kind of wanted to make with the ideological slant that they have for X-Men
Oh,
97.
what do you mean slant?
Slant.
Yeah,
Bent.
what do you mean slant? Whoa.
I'm going to call you a slope. if you
God
don't
damn
keep
it.
this
It's
up.
because
You
I'm
are Filipino.
I know, and I feel attacked.
Sorry, listeners. The truth comes out.
I feel attacked.
So the courthouse scene when they're putting Magneto on trial is clearly their little version of January 6th. Clearly.
Well,
Happened
yeah,
on January 6th?
What's that?
What happened?
there was a
on-
kerfuffle in Washington.
I don't think anything
DC,
happened.
not
there
the
was
state.
an organized crowd that tried to go and
It was a
speak
kerfuffle.
to.
And so there was an organized crowd outside of this courthouse.
Yeah.
And then they go inside. And there's kind of like a number of things that made me think it outside of them saying after the fact on the news. They're like, oh, they were able to quell the insurrection. Which
Well,
is,
I mean, that's
which
what
is
it
no
was. Like, that's the
insurrection,
proper
which
word
is
for it.
on the nose. It wasn't it.
That's the proper word for what
What
happened there. I get your comparison.
It was a
I'm
riot.
not-
They're both riots.
well, yeah, they're both right, but like that's that's why they.
But
said
then they're like,
you know.
oh, it's an insurrection.
I'm just saying that mutants and humans alike trying to exercise their right to free speech, that's not an insurrection or a riot.
But it
It's a
wasn't
peaceful
free
gathering.
speech.
It's a peaceful gathering. And if someone
It was a closed session.
instigates Americans to exercise their right to free speech, I don't see a crime. That's all I'm saying.
They had Magneto in that collar, and he wasn't doing anything bad.
Yeah.
He
couldn't.
was the one standing trial, but they had that moment where they said like, oh, the protesters have broken
because
through.
of everything he's done, and
Yeah,
they were trying to deliberate if he
because he
should
was-
be forgiven for it.
And then the judge is like, they want Magneto and the judges, and the judge is like, why do they want
yeah,
us?
he did say that. And he does say it in that fashion. Like
Yeah.
you did a little
Rod
bit
Stewart.
extra, but like it wasn't. That was close.
That was how over
That
the
was
top,
very close.
That was
yeah.
how over the top some of this voice acting was. Like that.
Oh, they've broken into the courtroom.
Oh,
my courthouse.
My favorite dialogue is when Jean is giving birth. Like everybody else is at some other thing, and it's just Jean Grey, who we find out is Madeline Pryor, and Wolverine, and she's like, "Oh, he's here," and Wolverine's like, "Oh, who? Apocalypse?"
Yeah.
It's like that's your go-to.
It was supposed to, like, that was, I guess, the part where it's, like, supposed to be funny or whatever.
I should have said Sabretooth. Like, that would have made... Like, yeah, you could handle Sabretooth. You ain't fighting Apocalypse by yourself.
What are you
Fuck
talking about? They had a whole, like, they did a comic where he absolutely wrecks Apocalypse. Because the only freaking... The only comic subscription I ever had access to was the Wolverine run, and it was after his adamantium got pulled out. And there was one comic where I guess he's in the Savage Land or whatever, and he fights Apocalypse.
He's
and
in the Savage Land a lot.
Yeah. So anyway, I say all of this to say, like, bringing up this, ideological, like, little nuggets into this show. It's like, if this is supposed to be for kids, which it isn't because of all the blood and all that stuff, then you're kind of like pushing a little bit of your agenda into that, which is kind of like, if it's supposed to be like this fun, happy, like comic book show, like the ideological slant wasn't there, as I already kind of established in the original run, because it was supposed to, like, they kind of established that the X-Men were in the middle and they were trying to like fight off the extremists on both sides. And this one, there only seemed to be one set of extremists.
Well, there was only one set of extremists on their on their radar. Like there wasn't anything else
and they made
pressing.
And they sort of made it a point, because in the original run, Magneto is the extremist. He's the one that always talks about mutant liberation and mutant supremacy. And now all of a sudden, well, Magneto is actually right. And Magneto is actually good. So it seems to me
That's because he's Jewish, Dan.
It is. And also because he was granted the title of leader of the X-Men.
No, I understand
at the beginning. So
Yeah.
he was trying to do what was right by Charles, because I was an old friend. But...
And he does get a fair amount of flack from whoever from the UN. It's just like, oh, well,
even the X-Men, they don't fucking trust him either.
Well, they were right, because one of the lines he said in that when he first took over was bullshit, because they had the line where it's like, I have arranged for the Morlocks to go to Genosha. I'm disappointed that Professor X, with all of his wealth, never thought to do that.
I thought that's a fair fucking point.
No, you know why it's not a fair point? I told you I went back and I watched a few episodes of the first one. The first thing Storm does when she takes over command of the Morlocks is give them passage to the fucking X-Men mansion. She gives them refuge.
Well, they also get passage.
Bullshit. And if you're gonna base this stupid,
no, they also get passage to Genosha.
That came first. It came first because it was in the original run.
Yeah, but they're already on
1992.
Genosha by the time fucking Magneto's saying this.
So it goes back to the whole thing that even when we mentioned with Roadhouse.
The continuity is kind of off.
The continuity is off, but it's also, we took this original premise and now we're just going to leave some of these things out. Oh, Morph is gay and non-binary. Magneto is actually right, even though Storm gave, the Morlocks free reign to go to the mansion and they turned her down.
He just used the Morlocks as an example, like he used Leech as an example, where he told that kid, he would never have to worry, but he still had to worry.
If you had run with the idea that he was using all of this to establish a better end, because I thought what they were going to do before they did the whole Bastion thing is that he was using Genosha and he was using the X-Men to build up Asteroid M and build the Acolytes, which I thought would have been perfect, because then
it would have been nice to see the Acolytes just in some fashion. I know we saw Amelia Voigt, but she wasn't doing her powers and shit, so I'm like, I don't care.
And then you do the whole Fatal Attractions, arc from that point. And that would have been, in my eyes, great, because then you could have set up a second season, which they're already going to do, and it's set to come out in later this year, maybe early next year.
Is that still directed by Bo? What's
he
his
got
name?
fired.
I know he got fired. I don't know why.
I think.
Why did he get fired?
They didn't give it an exact reason, but the idea is that he had it wasn't explicit, but it was kind of a creepy OnlyFans account.
Oh, so it had nothing to do with.
And also that he was very hard to work with.
Ugh.
So,
well, I don't know how creepy the OnlyFans is. So
but also, if he wrote this and he smuggled in all of this, these little things that I'm picking up on, I kind of don't want you back, because I kind of just want a nice balanced X-Men show. If you're gonna do this, then do it right.
Is it not possible that you're reading into these things a little more than intended?
No, it's fairly possible, but also I've been trained to pick these things up.
All right.
Listen, I've gone and seen a bunch of shit where I'm like, I really hope I don't have to see this shit today. I know how to suss this shit out. And if you punch me in the face with it, I'm going to be like, okay, that's kind of like a political bent to it. I'll give you an example. So I raised my kid sister, speaking of Saturday morning cartoons. I was super into that old Sonic cartoon, the one where it's just like they're in a dystopian future.
I know of it.
So I got them into that show, and they made that Sonic movie, what was it, right around COVID, the COVID lockdowns?
I know,
till 2020. Yeah. I ended up watching that with them, and I was thinking, man, they're probably going to sneak some bullshit into here. I'm going to have to be on guard, see what they're doing.
Weed it out.
Yeah. They didn't really do anything like that in that movie. I was shocked. I was like, holy crap, there's no agenda to this movie? That's weird.
And these are the times that we live in.
And then
one must be able to suss it out a bit.
And then when I watched the second one, again with my sisters, because it's their idea, it's you got us into this, so let's watch it together. And I'm like, you're in your 20s and I'm an old man. Why would we go do this? It was it's family time. We'll go. I'm like, all right, you're the boss. We'll go do it. And in the second movie, again, go through it. And I'm like, this is all right. There's no real problem. And the only thing that I was able to suss out of that movie is that towards the end, Sonic wins. He's supersonic or whatever. And Dr. Robotnik, Jim Carrey, is clearly beaten. And he's just you know what? Let's call a truce. Let's just agree that there were good people on both sides. Wow. And I was like, that's a Charlottesville reference, isn't it? Why is that in a Sonic movie?
That's great.
But also at the same time, I understand that I'm a politico. I understand that when people
I think in that instance you're reading a little too much into
it. That's an exact quote.
But that's a good line.
So
that's a funny line.
It's also delivered by Jim Carrey, who's notoriously great.
That's fair. Yeah.
So
Jim Carrey didn't. It wasn't glossed over him. He knew what he was saying.
So
he probably ad-libbed it.
Yeah.
I say all that to say, I understand that I'm a politico, and when things like this happen, I can suss out oh, you're doing this. Maybe if you're not doing it, you're inadvertently doing it. You're willfully ignorant of your bias.
Yeah.
But I can see that. Now, if you say to me, that was I think you're reading too much into it, I'm going to agree with you. I am probably reading too much into it, but I can read, the biases. You could probably say like, Dan, you're a little bit more skewed to this way. And I'd be like, maybe that's the case. But also at the same time, I want both sides to be punched. I believe in doing that on this podcast as well. Like when we talk about whatever politics we talk about, I believe that we should give the left or the right or the insane, not insane, as much shit as possible equally.
It's all insane.
It's all insane.
It is all insane.
There's no not insane.
I'm still wondering about that adamantium condom, though.
Oh, it's heavy.
It's gonna be heavy.
Yeah.
It's a fairly lightweight metal.
Like if you have like that upward
There's no
bend.
politics here.
If you have that upward bend, it might break it, depending on how.
Break it. It's an adamantium condom.
No, not the condom. Your dick. If you put it on,
How does it maintain its like lubrication?
You add the lubricant.
like grease, man. Like,
Yeah. Well, I don't know
have
if
you
that
never
means
had
it's-
sex?
That's gonna be a really beaten up pussy. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
well, the grease is on the
It's
inside,
like
so you don't
yeah.
chafe.
In fairness, gay men can use this too. The adamantium
gay men, yeah.
condom is good
Adamantium-
for everybody.
Yeah, you want to put lube on
What
the
about an
outside if you're
adamantium
doing
dildo?
anal.
Yeah.
What about an adamantium dildo?
Well,
that would
I mean,
work just the same as a dildo.
Yeah,
It's gonna
not
be-
gonna break.
It's just gonna. It's whatever. It's like a
but,
vibranium
that's-
dildo.
There's a lot of things that can go wrong.
Well, it could go wrong. It's
Honestly-
not like it's gonna pop claws. Like that's not what adamantium does.
A vibranium dildo. I know what vibranium is, fictitiously, of course, but I'm just going to say it's a great name for a product.
That is a good name for a dildo.
Vibranium
Yeah.
dildo sounds really
That's a good band name. Write that down.
All right, guys.
You know we're doing
Jot
a
that
podcast.
shit down.
We are running
First
low
off.
on time. Moses, what was your kind of like overall thought of X-Men 97?
I enjoyed it.
You enjoyed it?
Yeah, it was a good a recapturing of that nostalgia, and it did enough to push it forward. Where, like, because I want to see more story of just those characters, not necessarily anything that they've done before. But it is neat to see everything they've done before. I just wish they spent a little more time on it.
I agree with you. I do think there's a lot to be cleaned up with it. I think a lot of the dialogue
Could be fleshed out.
Yeah, there's certain things that needed to be fleshed out. There was like certain aspects, the story, like the Fatal Attraction
There was a
storyline
lot,
should
yeah.
have been longer, and we should have had less of like, let's just say, Forge and Storm.
That should have been saved for another season.
There should have been no Jubilee and
There shouldn't have been any of that.
Sunspot is his name. Sunfire. No, it's not
Sunspot.
Sunspot. There should have been no
Sunfire's the
Mojo
Jap.
like episode or whatever.
Yeah, that was kind of a wasted episode, or just like a wasted time thing.
Yeah, and it just seemed to me that there was so much time wasted on nonsense when you could have built up this Fatal Attractions storyline, which is disappointing to me because it's one of my favorite story arcs in X-Men lore.
They
And
could
the
have
fact
even done that with Gambit,
yeah,
Rogue, and Magneto too. Like even carried over those same tropes.
I did like a lot. I think within X-Men 97, there is a good story. There's a story to be fleshed out, and it could have been really good, but the way it was written, the way it was executed was just, there was too much trip ups.
It seemed rushed.
It seemed rushed, but also at the same time, too slow. It's like they had, we spent so much time trying to exposition in like the first 5-6 episodes that we had to rush the last 4 or 5.
And they were also expositioning 3 different stories.
Yeah, multiple stories, and some of them like
They didn't even
It
they didn't even hold
matter.
to.
And some of them were just needless. Like, I understand you're trying to represent certain communities by making Morph gay and making him non-binary.
Well,
but
that's-
at the same time, like, maybe you're going to flesh that out in the second season, but it was kind of pointless
Yeah,
in this season. It was like,
his powers are the biggest affront.
it's not even a big deal to me. If you just want to make him gay, make
It
him
is.
gay.
I
But
don't
also
care
don't
about
give him
that.
such a flamboyantly, like, stereotypical voice.
He could be the straightest fucking X-Men on that goddamn team and be as flamboyantly gay as he wants. It's just like his powers are an affront to me.
Also, I just really like
I just don't. I don't agree with
my biggest hang up, and I know I said it already in the show. I know I've been critical of this. The biggest hang up I had was that there was no payoff for Rogue dissenting. There was absolutely nothing there.
There was,
really-
yeah.
And that was it's supposed to be that critical, like, oh my God, she left the team. And I know, and they were building up to it the entire time. And it's like, yeah, like a couple minutes later, she's back. It's just that build up for such a, like, not
you
even a
say
payoff.
build up, but it was like one episode.
No, it was a build up because
It wasn't
build-up's
really
a build-up.
yeah, Gambit's Gambit's dead in the 5th episode.
So she goes to her old bit. Like, it's like, oh, my girlfriend's dead, so I'll go to my ex-girlfriend.
So it's like,
Like, that's kind of what it was.
so it's like, what is it? Episode 8 or 9 when she joins Magneto. So you have a couple
Something like-
episodes in there to build her up. I know they do one where it's like she's not even in it practically because it's all about Storm. But in that way, like there's just so much that they built up that they could have left on the cutting room floor and then just made it into a more concise story that would have been, I think.
Yeah, they didn't need
It's
to.
still about the money, though.
Yeah,
They gotta just belt them out.
I know you got to belt them out, but also at the same time, if you only had 10 episodes and they're all
Or if you only stuck to
approximately-
one story and belted out 10 episodes, it
Yeah.
would have been way better than them
I
doing
agree
3
with that.
stories
Yeah.
and belting
rushing
them out.
it out.
you know?
Yeah. Like, yeah, and that's, I think, ultimately what you're saying is that it was a good show,
Yeah.
but they just rushed too much.
No, it was a
With the- of the
Wikipedia
com-
of X-Men
Well,
comics of the 90s. And it's like, oh, here's 3 important things that happened. And we're done.
No.
And that's all you really get. It's like, oh, this kind of happened, this happened, and this also happened. We're done.
And we're done.
And at the end of the day, I think that's probably what made the story not what it should have.
Compelling.
Not what it could have been.
It wasn't very compelling.
Yeah. Because you take these pivotal moments within that run, Wolverine losing his.
Yeah, you get your
skeleton.
shock.
Yeah, you get your shock, and
But
then
you
that's
get
it.
no
Yeah.
awe.
Yeah. And then with the way the season ended, it seems like we're not even going to get his run with the bone claws.
No, he's still healing. And
Well, no, it's like because when he loses his bone claws, he just runs off and goes and like becomes a, he leaves.
well, that
the
would be a
X-Men.
whole nother.
Yeah.
That would be a whole nother show.
Yeah. So maybe you could have a different.
Maybe a
X-Men show.
spin-off,
Yeah.
but how many animators do they really have? Like, they can't even get CGI.
Well, now people are like, they're obsessed with the idea now of, reviving Spider-Man.
Well, they're going to
Reviving-
do that. It's they're supposed. Well, they were in talks of that when they were doing X-Men '97. It's supposed to be like I forget what this Spider-Man title is, but it's an animated. I don't know if it picks up from the cartoon of the '90s where we still don't know where Mary Jane is, but X-Men solved that because
They addressed it.
They showed Peter Parker and Mary Jane just standing there watching the atrocities on Genosha, and so. I guess problem
All's
solved.
well that ends well.
Yeah, I mean, we'll figure this out in the Spider-Man cartoon.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to figure out which way they bend in that way politically.
Yeah.
But until then, be sure to subscribe to this podcast. Leave us a 5-star review. Check us out on YouTube and Rumble. Make sure that you like, comment, share, and hit that notification bell. Follow us on social media. We are at Loud and Drunk on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Make sure that you bookmark loudanddrunk.com. You can catch up on the podcast, check out some merch, everything Loud and Drunk. Hit us up, loudanddrunk.com.
Hashtag get damn paid.
Yes, get me paid. Unless you don't like what I say on this podcast, then you won't
Oh,
help me
Yeah,
get paid.
hashtag get Dan poor.
How could you do something that's already like actively happening?
Oh, you could be poorer.
So, for Moses, Eric Lancher, and Dan, that's me. Until next time.
To me, my drunks.